Good day Gambia. Welcome to yet another edition of D's Take. It's a great day for the Gambia. It's a great day for the Gambia in Brussels. Why? The Gambia put up a plan, went on a donor roundtable, and was able to mobilize in excess of 1.4 billion euros over the period of the plan, which is about give and take 4 years, 5 maximum. But we need to understand what happened and what transpired for us to appreciate the news that came out of Brussels. There's a lot of euphoria, and I think always the problem of Gambia and Gambians is taming and managing our expectations. See, donors just don't give out monies because they want to give out money. I mean, you recall in the early or late 90s, we had what you call Strategy for Poverty Alleviation. Those days, HIPIC was the it thing in the developmental spheres of the world, be it the World Bank, the Paris Club, IMF, EU. Everyone was talking about HIPIC, highly indented poor countries. Fast forward, we came up with PRSP, Poverty Reduction Strategy Papers. That was a developmental strategy that we used, PRSP 1, PRSP 2, then later we had what you call the PAGE. The PAGE gave birth to what we now call the NDP, National Development Plan, and it's this National Development Plan that we took to the donors in Brussels for funding. See, a National Development Plan is a comprehensive blueprint of what a country needs, and particularly the Gambia for that matter. Gambia put all its developmental aspirations over a 4-year, 5-year period, from the environment to sanitation to infrastructure, education, health, you name it, they put it in there. Once that is done, we have a funding envelope. This envelope needs financing, and unfortunately, Gambia is not in a position to finance such an envelope because we're resource constrained. Therefore, we sought help from the donors, and our traditional donors, the EUs, the World Banks, the Badia funds, the IDBs of the world, the Paris Club donors, etc., etc. Therefore, the EU decided to put up a round table for us, getting all its member states and satellite organizations to come on board and see what they can put in terms of helping the Gambia. The donors came around at a round table, look at our project, and each of this particular donor, country, institution decided to make an intervention at a particular program within the development blueprint called the NDP. Now, the donors made a pledge, and of all the pledge committed, there is now a funding gap. The funding gap is total need or resource requirement minus total pledges collected. That funding gap needs financing or another subsequent roundtable from a different set of donors. Therefore, the Gambia is coming back home with a 1.4 billion towards the NDP and hoping that the rest will either be financed or we will look for alternate source of funding, or probably review the NDP downward a bit to be realistic relative to the total committed funds that we may come across. But see, a pledge in fiscal terms, a pledge in macroeconomic terms, a pledge in economics is a promise. It's a promise that you can't just take to the bank and cash. It's a promise that you can't discount and at least get a discounted value on its face value. Oh no. It's a pledge that you need to walk on. See, all these donors, in developmental language, we have what you call prior actions, condition precedent. We have what you call triggers. These are things that you need to meet before these pledges come to fruition. But before that, the government, by way of either the Ministry of Finance or the Office of the President, need to come up with a rigorous aid coordination unit. Because a pledge is as good as the subsequent follow-ups to make good that pledge. Therefore, an aid coordination unit needs to be in place to travel around Europe to make sure that these pledges come to life. But of all the 1.4 billion euros pledge, I can safely say that we may access 80% of these pledges. Why? These pledges will come with conditions. Like I said, a condition precedent. These pledges may need a trigger. For example, let's say an environmental group within the EU member states decided that they're interested in an environmental program within the NDP, and they pledge 400 million euros, for example. This is just an example. Now, the 400 million euros is there sitting, waiting to be collected, pending a ratification from the parliament or the country that is giving out those funds, pending conditions that were precedent to that pledge, what Gambia needs to make to get that pledge. Some of these things are fiscal in nature. Debt, deficit, borrowing. These are triggers, and if the government of the Gambia don't meet these triggers, they're as good as dead. And that's what I want Gambians to understand. That's what we need to make Gambians understand. And also, there's a component of these funds. The components of these funds have consultancies that are inbuilt. They will need studies, and all these studies, consultancies will be paid for from these funds. Give and take 20%, give and take sometimes up to 35–40% of all funds coming in country have that aspect. Another aspect is some developmental work is what I consider tied aid. You want to access the funds, you can go ahead, but you need to do the procurement sometimes in the country that's giving the funds. Sometimes you need to hire a contractor from the countries that's giving out these funds. And all of these have a cost, and Gambians need to understand that it's not $1.4 billion or euros that's coming our way to spend. Expectations are high, and this is where the government sometimes need to come in, tame and manage the expectations of Gambians and tell us the way things are. The general public really don't understand how things are, but if things are put in perspective, we are not going to get all the money. Secondly, we have a funding gap. Now we need to look at other bilaterals and multilaterals outside of the EU dispensation and the London and Paris Club who can come in and help. These are the OPIC funds, these are the Kuwaiti funds, these are the Saudi funds, these are the Badia. I mean, some of them even attended the conference today, but we can go and have bilateral arrangements and multilateral arrangements with these countries and institutions to see what they can do. Alternatively, like I said, is to review the ambitious nature of this document and see whether we can cut it down a bit to close the resource gap or the funding gap or the funding deficit, shall I say. Therefore, I just wanted to have a word or two with my esteemed viewers, a word or two with my fellow compatriots to explain what this means, to explain what is in it for Gambia, to explain further how these operations work. But nonetheless, a great thank you to the team of the Ministry of Finance and the government at large, because an NDP is a comprehensive document that cuts across all sectors, and all sectors of the economy has had an input, and it went through a validation process, and it had what you call a stakeholder approach and a participatory approach, whereby it was a bottom-up document. So everyone should really have a pat in the back for coming up with such a document in terms of going forward for the country. And lastly, I hope after this NDP has been executed in the 4 years, we will have a revisit of what kind of an economic model we want to put in place. How do we want to structure this economy? How do we want to get Gambia out of the beggar mentality and beggar situation we find ourselves? This is critical to an organic development, and it's only organic development that will change this country. China, poor people like us, but they look inward. Yes, numbers is to their advantage, but there are other Singapore tigers today. Poverty was abound, but they have changed their lot and fortune thanks to an economic model that was inward looking. So I do hope after the NDP has been executed, the next strategy paper that we need to come up with as a country will look at Gambia and look at Gambia's developmental aspirations on a homegrown basis. Because aid is not going to build this country. Aid will sustain this country. And we are not looking for sustenance. We're looking for development. And development comes when a citizenry and a group of people roll their sleeves, take their destiny into their hands, and march forward for prosperity. Thank you, Gambia. Thank you, my esteemed listeners. Until I come your way, this was D-Stake, and kudos and congratulations for the team that put up the NDP and the successes they had in the EU. Thank you so much.